When things began in Syria in 2011, I was living in Gaza and reporting from Gaza on the struggle of the Palestinian people against the Zionists and the illegal siege on Gaza and all the things that the Zionists are doing to oppress Palestinians, to murder Palestinians. But when events began in Syria, I started questioning the reports we were hearing from Al Jazeera and other state-owned media outlets that seemed like they weren't telling the truth. And as I dug deeper and talked with Syrians in Canada, I started learning from them that their relatives in Syria were telling them a different thing than what the media was saying. In 2014, I had the opportunity to go to Syria for my first time, although I had been deeply researching and very actively involved with Syrians abroad until that point. And as soon as I went to Syria, from the day one, I started hearing from Syrians that everything that the media had been saying about their country, about a popular uprising, of nonviolent protests, about their government cracking down on them, that all these things were lies. They're largely not in Syria. They're writing the reports from Beirut or from Washington, New York. If they go to Syria, unfortunately they go with a predetermined script. I've seen this. In November 2016, I was in Aleppo and there were journalists from New York Times, LA Times, and other Western media. The way in which they reported the terrorist bombardment on November 3rd of Aleppo was different from how I reported it, because I went there with the objective of reporting what Syrian people are experiencing. They, it seems, went there with the objective of reporting a narrative that would suit the Western agenda of regime change in Syria. Fake news means Al Jazeera, BBC, CNN, Fox, The Guardian, Channel 4 News. Channel 4 News has been in Syria. One of their star reporters, Krishnan Gurumurthy, has been in Aleppo, and he reported a Syria that was very different from the Aleppo that I know and that Syrians know. And when he went back to Aleppo after it was liberated, Syrian MP Faris Shahabi challenged him and said, "You reported that these were rebels. It turned out they were Al-Qaeda." And this Channel 4 reporter said, "I don't want to talk about it. Let's not go there." He was caught in his own lies. He didn't have the dignity to admit he'd been lying. But there's a greater example. This child, Amran Daknish, his photo was taken and it was exploited, and the world was led to believe that this boy had been gravely injured by Syrian or Russian airstrikes. He was not gravely injured. It was a mild injury, and it was not by an airstrike. It was most likely by one of these terrorist explosive devices, with the express purpose of capturing a photo that could be used to manipulate public opinion. He was called the icon of Syrian suffering, and so-called rebels dubbed him, the voice of Syria. But he was a child that was exploited by this media, and his family did not agree to this, and his family came out very clearly in support of the Syrian government and army and against the terrorists. That is a prime example of fake news. But fake news with regard to Syria, we can say from day one, the news that this was a popular and nonviolent uprising, that is one of the key elements of fake news, the idea that the people are against their president. You go to Syria and talk with people and you'll find, no, the people overwhelmingly support their president and their army. Let's take Aleppo and Raqqa. What did the U.S. illegal forces in Syria do to Raqqa? They destroyed it, and they killed hundreds of Syrian civilians. Let's look at Aleppo. What did the Syrian and Russian forces do? They waged strategic battles against terrorists. They opened humanitarian corridors. And I was actually on one of these corridors on November 4th. And that corridor was opened for civilians to leave terrorist-held areas of Aleppo to get medical care, to come and live in a safer area. Terrorists prevented civilians from leaving that corridor by shelling it, and that's not the first time it's happened. So the Syrian government opened corridors, they were waging strategic battles, and they did use military sieges to force the terrorists to lay down their weapons or to take amnesty or to be given safe passage out. And that is how Aleppo was liberated. terrorist factions, Al-Qaeda in Syria, was given passage out of Aleppo so that peace could be restored to that area and so that civilians could go back to their lives, schools could open. And that's exactly what happened after Aleppo was secured. The same in Homs, the same in Madaya. I mean, that is a perfect example of restraint. They did not use an American tactic and just obliterate the areas. They did not use an Israeli tactic. For example, in Shijai, in Gaza, Israel flattened the neighborhood. The Syrian government and the Russian allies didn't do that. That is restraint. They are perhaps one of the greatest propaganda constructs in this whole war on Syria. The idea that rescuers who are claiming to be impartial and neutral are working in Al-Qaeda areas and are funded by the West, over $150 million. And they carry weapons and they chant with Al-Qaeda. We're sold this notion that they are rescuing Syrian civilians, and they're constantly running with babies in their arms. They're so valiant. Why are they working in Al-Qaeda areas? Why are they holding weapons? Why are they participating in executions? Why were they founded by a British ex-military officer and trained in Turkey? The White Helmets are a construct to bring humanitarian intervention to Syria. In other words, a no-fly zone. In other words, the destruction of Syria like Libya. Syria has resisted this, and the West has used every propaganda tactic it can think of. The DPRK is made out in our Western media to be a mortal threat to the West or to the whole world. The leader is vilified, and the population has disappeared in Western media. When it comes to corporate media reporting on the DPRK, we don't hear about the 25 million people. We just hear about this one man, and his image, his whole persona is rendered into this cartoonish villain persona. And this is what's been done to the president of Syria. This is what was done to Libya. Every time the imperialists want to target a nation, the first thing they have to do is vilify the leadership, maybe impose sanctions on them, and strangle the nation in hopes that they can topple the leader. The DPRK was completely destroyed in the 50s. It is, since the 50s, it has rebuilt remarkably its capital city, Pyongyang, and its countryside. And it has had to, because of the American nuclear threat, it was America that brought nukes to the Korean Peninsula. It is America that threatens consistently to totally destroy North Korea. It is because of this American threat that North Korea has tried to achieve a nuclear deterrent.